50 years. That's how long it's been since I graduated from Crawford High School in San Diego, California. And recently, my classmates gathered at our 50th reunion. Now, I did not attend as there have been a lot going on in my personal life, led by the passing of my Rhonda. May she rest in peace. But like most reunions, I'm sure there were hugs and memories and laughter, discussions about families, careers, and of course, the hairstyles of the day, right? The 70s. 50 years have passed, a milestone that should be filled with joy, laughter, and the warm embrace of old friendships. Yet, as I scrolled through the pictures, I was just struck by something. The faces I saw were overwhelmingly white. I couldn't help but ask, where were the black students? Where were the kids who rode the buses with us across town to Horace Mann Junior High and Crawford High School? Where were they? Where were the rest of us? Now, back in the day, you see, in the late 60s and 70s, many of us who lived in Southeast San Diego were bused across town. First to Horace Mann Junior High School and then to Crawford High School. Now, against the backdrop of the civil rights movement, and after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., our parents were debating the path toward educational equality. Some were uh, against the opposition, were opposed to the city's new plan of racial integration, while others made the conscious choice to put us on those buses. The program bused Black students from our Southeast San Diego to schools in the Northeast, including Crawford High and Horace Mann. Officials thought that this was necessary to comply with federal desegregation orders, but critics said that this would disrupt neighborhoods and place unfair burdens on African American students. And so every morning we climbed aboard those buses, carrying not just our books, but the weight of integration. For some, Crawford High School meant opportunity, new classes, new friends, and maybe a path to college. But for others, it was different. How different, you say? Well, there were concerns about racial tensions and unequal treatment in the integrated schools. There were walkouts and parent meetings and all kinds of things going on. Truth is, not every African American student felt welcomed. Some faced prejudice head on, others faced the quieter burden of being made to feel invisible. I remember the bus rides more than the school sometimes because when you got there, it was always a case where you felt like you just were in someone else's house. But don't get me wrong, it wasn't all bad. I had teachers who pushed me, I had friends of every race, but there was always that edge that we had to prove ourselves twice over. 50 years later, the reality may explain why so few of my Black classmates even came to the reunion. For some, high school is a memory, it's celebrated. For others, they'd rather forget, leave it in the past. And that's the thing about reunions. They reveal more than just how much we've aged. They show us the gaps in our collective memory, what we remember and what we choose to forget. For many of my white classmates, Crawford represents pep rallies, dances, and so called uh, best years of our lives. But for many Black students, Crawford may represent resilience, survival, or even trauma. So when we gather and those voices are missing, the story feels incomplete. The real question isn't just where are they now? It's also how can we make space for their stories? Because until we do make space, our reunions, like our history, will always be partial, a reflection, but not the full truth. Back then, our very presence at Crawford was shaped by social and political battles of the late 1960s and early 70s. San Diego wasn't immune to the struggles of our equality. Busing was supposed to be an answer, supposed to take us out of our neighborhoods and place us where we were expected to blend into an environment that we always were not always welcomed. By many of us, for many of us, those daily bus rides were more than a commute. They were a symbol of both progress and pain, a reminder of how far America had to go in reckoning with race. At Crawford, friendships were made, but lines were often drawn. Some of us found acceptance, but many of us found alienation. Subtle and not so subtle forms of racism shaped our daily experience. And while we earned our diplomas, we also carried away the invisible scars of navigating an education system that treated us as outsiders. So when I looked at the pictures across social media, my question was more than curiosity. It was a reckoning. Did my black classmates feel unwelcome at this reunion, just as we sometimes felt unwelcome at the school? Did life just scatter us all over economically, geographically? Like, what happened? Where was everybody? Or was it the story of our time where we had always been different, and thus our connections to the school were never as deep or lasting? This isn't a question with an easy answer. It's not. It's, however, a question for worth asking. The absence of black faces in those reunions reminds me that it just speaks to not just who did or who didn't attend, but to the larger question of how race shaped memory, belonging, and legacy. 50 years later, the reunion reminds me not just of who we were, but of who we have become, and of the distance still between the promise of integration and the reality of our lived experiences. Greg J here. I hope that you continue to love one another. One man's perspective, yo. Peace and blessings.